Hi guys, who's at the Marriage Warrior, and today we're going to talk about how Christian wives lose their identity. And I want to make sure that, we're not looking just at Christian wives. This happens to women and wives, whether they're Christians or not. However, Christian wives have a whole nother mindset with how the scripture says for a Christian wife to operate in her marriage. And so we're going to look at how to rebuild it as well as we tear it down. Okay, so first of all, the scripture, when you become a Christian wife, is to submit to the husband. And what we forget in the scripture is the scripture talks about submitting one to another, not just women submit. Now, the whole submission authority thing is rooted in a man loving his wife. So that piece cannot be ignored when the wife is trying to be a Christian wife to submit. Because if you're not careful, if you're dealing with a husband that's just in authority and yet he's not operating under a Christian character, under Christian love, you're going to wind up in abuse if you're not careful, if you're submitting. So the scripture is about submitting under love. And when women submit under love, we love it. It's great. But if the man is not acting in a character of Christ, a love of Christ, treating his woman as the weaker vessel, being able to treat her with understanding. The scripture talks about that too, that husbands treat your wives with understanding or your prayers are going to be hindered. And the prayers of a man are for big things. They are for finances, they are for health, they're for promotion, they are for safety. And when a man's prayers are hindered because he's not treating his wife well, that is the foundations that are going to be shaken inside of the marriage. So when you're looking as a Christian trying to submit under the authority of your husband, that love component must be there. And you need to really take an assessment of that if you find yourself submitting under an authority that is not loving, because it will damage you. And that's not what Christ wanted us to do when the scripture is talking about how to submit. Submission is a lovely word that we have kind of distorted, and certainly the male in the religious realms have abused it as well. Woman, submit to me. That's what the scripture says. But there's no love, because love would never do that to someone. And so you want to get into the flow of the scripture. And if you're not in the flow of the scripture, where the husband has to love you first, is what the scripture says, because Christ loves the church first. It said husband loves your wife as Christ. So that is a key component, because if you're not careful, you're going to lose your own identity in the submission role of a Christian wife. That gets dangerous, because God never called you to that. So I'm not saying divorce him. I'm saying take an assessment of what's going on and begin to try to work with him, maybe get counseling to try to work on it. Because if you're submitting to an authority because you're trying to be a Christian wife and you're being abused, that is going to harm your core strength, and your spiritual development's going to be stunted with the Lord as well. So if you're careful about that and you try to readdress that, if your marriage is kind of under that authority and the biblical authority, trying to make it right, you need to understand that you might be dealing with some narcissistic tendency in your spouse that's just using religion to control a person, because narcissism and the character traits of narcissism is to control. And so if you use a scripture to then control another person, that person being controlled is going to get damaged, because God created us all as individuals. And marriage is a blessing of God. It's supposed to be something that makes you thrive, each individual. It makes you support, but you have to have that quality of submit one to another. And so if there's not that room to submit one to another, then it's going to be a problem. The other thing that Christian wives fall under is they don't feel that they have the ability to demand answers from their husbands. If your husband is doing some things that are shady or that are causing you to feel insecurity, and they're not coming to you and And, the scripture says, reason together. Come and let us reason together. And you're in the dark about half the stuff. Your own life is going to get shaky. You're going to feel very insecure and you're going to feel very controlled. So the scripture says, come reason together for that specific reason. And that is so that you as an individual won't get lost inside of a Christian marriage trying to be a Christian wife. And so although I'm a big supporter of roles of the Christian marriage in the institution that God created, but I think we are falling under a curse on some level or negative energy. I don't care what you call it, but it's not allowing us to thrive. And so the institution itself of marriage is causing a bondage for people. That's not Christ. Christ gave us freedom and marriage as a blessing, so that if you're reasoning together and you're submitting one to another, and absolutely the male's authority role you're going to love if you're feeling loved, and communication is part of love. I mean, if you don't care about a person enough to communicate something that is occurring in their lives, that's not love. And sometimes guys just let me make the decision and it's my decision and I get the authority and shut up, woman, and sit over there. That's going to abuse you because your own life is not thriving. And so although I don't want to stir up things with marriages, I want you to take an assessment of this and readdress it with your husband. See if you can come into some kind of marriage meeting or issue night. And if it's gotten too bad that you don't feel the ability to do that, get some help. Because one thing about these guys is that if they feel that you women are going to seek help, typically they will go along with you because they don't want to be talked about behind their back. So if they won't talk to you, bring them to someone else, so that mainly they will start opening up, because that's the biggest part for men, is they have a very difficult time opening up with their emotions. They do kind of lean into I'm right because they don't really want to hear that they're wrong, because wrong for a man feels inadequacy, or they may feel rejection. And so once they start talking, because they get a little more comfortable with whomever they're in front of, sometimes you can get to a place where you can tell the counselor or the coach and your spouse is hearing that you're hurting inside of the institution that's supposed to be blessing you, and hopefully they'll listen. If you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.